Um, you've already heard a little bit about Generation Scotland. We're going to drill down into some of the detail here. If I can get the first slide up, and then I'll use this in future. Okay, I've not got my T-shirt on, but I hope I'm recognizable. In the middle, Rachel, up there, and over there, Archie. We're the core team that are looking after Generation Scotland for you. I'm a member of a cohort. I'm a member of 3 cohorts. I'm a member of the Aberdeen Children in the 1950s. I was born exactly 6 years after the NHS came into existence. So you now know some personal information about me, and I don't mind you sharing it. I'm also a member of the UK Biobank. We won't talk about that particularly, but that's a UK-wide study. I'm also a signed-up member of SHARE. Now, you've all got a brochure in your information pack about SHARE. We'll come back to it later, but I hope that as many as possible of you will sign up to SHARE, because this is going to help us all. Right. Why did we start the cohort? This is going to be a common theme. We have been watching a rise in chronic disease. Stroke, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, dementia, arthritis, name your worst fear. They're all on the rise. And the main reason is that we're all living longer. So the question we wanted to ask was, can Generation Scotland help towards early diagnosis and early treatment, and make those treatments more effective and more personal, more appropriate to each individual that turns up in the clinic? So that was number one. The other thing that we wanted to do was to emphasize this point that it's not all about physical health, it's about mental well-being too. And that if we look at the stark statistics, 1 in 4 of us, each and every year, will have some kind of mental health episode, an anxiety, depression, or perhaps something even more severe and debilitating each and every year. So that's something which has been under the radar for most medical health research, but not anymore. So here's just a diagram of what we're doing in Generation Scotland. 24,000 of you so far have contributed to this study in 7,000 family groups. We think families are really important. They bring with us not just their histories of where they've been born and where they've grown up, but they bring with them their medical histories. And it's so important to know what our parents and our children's illnesses are, because that will be more specific to the family than it will be to the general population. And obviously we wanted to measure all the things you'd like to know about heart disease, about lung disease, about diabetes and obesity. That's the sort of thing that a specialist working in a hospital would want to know. But we also wanted to ask questions about mental health, about depression, about thinking skills, about how well we remember things, and how much that has an impact on our physical health. And we also wanted to measure pain. Pain is a remarkably under-researched area, yet I am now starting to find that my knees are not as good as they used to be, and I can't kick a football around with my grandson, who just loves playing football, and I used to love it too, but now I've got to that certain age. So I want to know about that, and I want to know how we can treat it well and better. And that's something which is really distinctive about Generation Scotland. We're not interested in just the brain or just the heart or just the lungs or just the bones. We want to look at it in the round, because we think that if we do that, we'll get a much, much better idea about health in general. If you like, a holistic approach. So we asked you 400 different questions about lifestyle and medical history, and we did 150 different clinical tests when you came into the clinic to be examined. But that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the data that we've collected. You gave us permission to link that data into your NHS medical records, and you also said that we could take a sample of blood and of urine, and that blood could be used to do genetic studies to tell us about who you were and where you came from, and to link all of that together. And by doing all of those, we could get a very good picture of you, all kept very safely within the NHS and within the university, with very safe and secure ways to keep your information private and personal, but could be brought together to give us a much bigger and better picture of health and how it developed. And the reason for looking at your blood DNA is because it would tell us about how you were related, not just to people that you knew to be your first and second generation colleagues, but if we went to Aberdeen, we could actually show that you were just a very big, large family, that you were distantly related to other people within that community, more often than not. And so that was another really important part of the study. And the technology that we have now to look at the information within the DNA that connects us all through the generations is exquisite in its detail. So if you look at that picture in the middle, it's one of those spot the differences or spot the ball we used to get in the P&J in Aberdeen, and you would try and find out where was the ball in that football match as Aberdeen crashed to yet another defeat by Celtic or something like that. At least not in my era. We were the champs. We were doing really well. So, but I doubt if anyone could spot the difference between those two images. And that's because there's just one pixel, one tiny spot of a difference between those two pictures. But we can, if we're looking at not a photograph but at DNA, we can spot that one difference in 3,000 million different points. So that's incredibly accurate. We can also then translate all of that information into a kind of map, if you like, or a picture of the differences that distinguish one individual from another. And that spotty picture there, each of the spots is a measure of the strength of a genetic factor, and they are either in red, high risk, medium risk in yellow, and low risk in green. And that's one individual's map of their risk factors for a particular type of disease. In this case, it's inflammatory bowel disease. It could be lung disease, it could be heart disease. And what you'll see is very typical. Every one of us has got some high risk factors, some middling, and some low. It's about the balance. And what we're going to do is do lots and lots of comparisons of spot pictures between all of you in the round and pick out the things that keep coming up time and time again. And then we're going to use that to match your type of inflammatory bowel disease or lung disease or bone disease to the best medicine that's going to fix the problem in the genetic makeup. So here's just a few numbers. I think it's important that we give you feedback and tell you what we've done with all of this information. We are now one of the most popular studies for people to come from around the UK and indeed around the world to come to and work with us, collaborate with us to try and ask difficult unsolved problems in medical research. 300 different research teams are now working with Generation Scotland. So that's one of the great added values of working with all of you, is that we've been able to create something which allows lots of different research questions to be addressed and answered. These are mainly from universities, but they're also from drug companies. And we'll come back to a question about that, but we specifically asked you whether or not you would be happy if, under our terms of safe data sharing, you would allow us to collaborate with industry. And the reason for that is that we do the research, the NHS treats the patients, the academics do the research, but ultimately it's industry that takes the risk on developing a new medicine. And so we need to be in partnership with them, a partnership of equals, and that's what we're setting up. Out of all of that, we've published 180 research papers. We make sure that those research papers go into the very best journals, and we also make sure that those papers are also available widely to the community, so-called open research. And if you go to our website, you'll get a synopsis, mainly, usually, written by me. So if it doesn't make sense, come back to me, I'm the guilty party. I try to just provide a little short summary of what each research study has done and what part your data has played in it. And out of that, we've made some really quite important discoveries. We've learnt a lot about genes and lifestyle and the environment and how that influences health and well-being, very much as Corey's just been talking to you. And about ways to improve our prediction of lung disease, Why is it that some smokers don't develop lung disease and people who've never smoked in their lives do? And I'll just give you a few examples of that. The well-known Glasgow effect. Two big cities, Glasgow and Edinburgh, 50 miles apart, yet life expectancy in Glasgow for men is significantly less than for people living in Edinburgh. You might think that that's down to their genes, that there are different genes in Glasgow from Edinburgh, but we've explored that, and that does not explain it. And David Batty's going to come back and talk to you more about this. It's complex. None of these answers come easily, but it's very clear that genes do play a big part in terms of blood pressure, in terms of obesity, in terms of heart disease. But it's more complex than that. It really matters where you've been born, when you were born, where you've been born, how you've been brought up, and those whole, what we call socio-economic factors. But here's one where we have made a really quite significant impact on our understanding of lung disease. We've contributed to studies that now give us not 1, not 10, but 100 different genetic factors that we know in combination are going to determine whether or not somebody is at high, medium, or low risk of developing lung disease. And so with that, we're able to think about ways of going from the gene to what we call a drug target, the protein that's made by the gene, to then mount a clinical study, ideally in the population that we've already studied in the first place, and then into a clinical trial and to develop and bring to the NHS a new medicine. So that's a long process, but it starts with the research that we do in cohorts. Another example, genes linked to depression. Now, it's very clear, it will be clear to all of you probably, that some of these problems of mental health run in families. There are some that are relatively affected. We'll hear more about this from Stephen Laurie later, and there are others that are relatively free. But if we look back in history, and the history here is very short, 3 years ago, there were only 2 genes that we could nail down and say, these 2 genes are really important. Move the clock on, and Generation Scotland has contributed to changing that number from 2 to 44. But stop press, another 20 findings since that paper was published at the end of 2017. So here we are sitting in 2018 with close to 100 different genetic factors that we know we need to take into account when we're looking at risk of depression. And I think this is probably the last one. The other thing that you're doing is working with investigators who are taking on one of the toughest tasks of our time, which is to look into dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, and to see if we can understand what are the earliest events in that progression during aging. And is there a way in which we can intervene early and trial out new medicines to halt the onset and the progression of this illness? It's going to be a tough task, but members of Generation Scotland are helping a study led from here in Edinburgh by Craig Ritchie, and our man in Amsterdam, Archie, is in that little picture. You won't be able to see him, but you can see him later, and he wants to hear from Generation Scotland people that are at the meeting today, as does Rachel, to maybe tell us a little bit about your experience. And if we went back to that picture from the children of the 1950s, if you'd looked very hard, you'd have seen me too. So I was there, and it was a great meeting. So, things that you've helped us to show and discover. It really has been incredible what you have helped show. You've shown us the value of health and lifestyle information, the importance of physical and mental health. The two really do go together. It's also told us that every family tells us a different story. Of course, we knew that, but it's good to be able to put some hard data to go along with that, some hard evidence to just show how different families are and what that can tell us. The other thing, and this reflects points made earlier by James and by Corey, it really is important to go right back to birth. Our life trajectory starts at the day we are born, and that's really important to know. The NHS is the best. We all know that. We really have to fight hard to preserve it because it's continually being attacked in different ways and in different forms. It's a tough, tough thing to do. But in this year, celebrating 70 years of the NHS, I think we've got to renew our vow of support. Generation Scotland is the best, I'd say that, but you have been fantastic in helping us discover things that we really needed answers to. But with your help, I think we can make it even better. And the reason for that, and it's been illustrated earlier, is that Scotland is the best place to do this kind of research in the UK. There is such a willingness to contribute to this kind of research. And what we're trying to do now is to think seriously about how we connect lots of different studies together. And part of that is building on our NHS, and part of it's about building on the fantastic ways in which we can collect data and pull it all together. So we have Generation Scotland and Aberdeen Children in the 1950s working together in Aberdeen. The same is true in Dundee, working with GoDarts, which is all about diabetes. We've got in the islands, we've got a study in Orkney and in Scotland, in Shetland, and we're trying to pull that together with elements of Generation Scotland. And of course, we're going to hear shortly about the Lothian birth cohort, born in Edinburgh, and the Their World cohort, so lots of different cohorts. And because of the way our NHS operates in Scotland, there's a potential to connect those virtually through NHS data. So that transforms the picture from a few thousand to hundreds of thousands. There are at least 300,000 individuals in Scotland participating in research today that we can potentially link together. Wouldn't that be powerful? So what next? We've heard about the Guthrie blood spots. We would love to be able to have consent from those who are part of Generation Scotland to go back to the cards that were their first intervention, if you like, within the NHS, and to ask things that we can answer now with those blood spots. Technically, we can answer with those blood spots and link from birth to the present day. And of course, we built Generation Scotland as a family study. We wanted parents and children to be participants in the study, but for reasons of ethics and consent, we were only able to recruit people that were 18 years or older. They're older. What about the children of those families that were under 18 but are now 18 and over? Can we incorporate them? More importantly, can we go to the younger generation and the children of the participants in Generation Scotland and recruit them to the study? That's what we'd most like to do. And this comes back to a theme that Andrew Morris outlined for you, this notion that data really can save lives, that if we are able to connect information from all different sources, your NHS records, from how you live in the world, how much exercise you take, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether what kind of interactions you have with social media, all of those things can be very important in telling us about lifestyle and health trajectories. So for me, it's a 24,000-fold thanks to everyone that's been a participant in Generation Scotland to date. I want to make it an even bigger thanks next time we meet, because I would love to see the next generation of Generation Scotland. You can keep in touch with us through our email address and through our website, and of course, talk to Archie and Rachel if you've got more questions, and tell us about how you'd like to be participating in it.